So, welcome. This is Ask an Engineer. The topic is renewable tech. I have been told by the person that runs the camera that I can be long-winded and boring. So hopefully on the other Ask an Engineer videos, the video team cuts out my tendency to repeat myself and to be boring. And if you think I'm boring, please don't tell me. Please don't put that in the comments. I like to ask for comments, but not that one. My poor frail ego just can't handle it. But with that, let's jump into it so I'm not too long-winded and boring. All right, first question about renewable tech. How can individuals and households use renewable energy in their daily lives? So it really depends on what your goal is. I know we're in Idaho, so our power provider is Idaho Power, at least where we currently live. And you can pay extra to use some of the windmills that they have. And so you're paying for renewable power. And the idea there is that you're kind of investing in Idaho Power, investing in renewables. So that's one way you could use it. It's more vague, I think, than I feel like a lot of people like. I think people like to have a little bit more tangible response in their life. As you may know, we have solar panels on our house. We put them up when we built the house. But we did that for financial reasons. We did the installation ourselves, and until Idaho Power recently changed things, they were going to pay themselves off relatively quickly. Now we have no idea because we're getting a lot less value. So if you are trying to do renewable energy for financial reasons, then that can depend if you have like a water source going by you, or like we live in an incredibly windy area. So I've actually thought about putting up wind turbines instead of solar panels, because solar panels in the winter get nothing, but we get tons of wind. But all of those are pretty difficult because they require at least a level of technical ability that most people don't have. I mean, for this audience, I'm assuming you're all either engineers or want to be engineers. So the barrier to entry is not nearly as bad. That's something you can figure out. But it still is a little bit of a challenge to put up solar panels, to put up wind turbines, to figure out how that's all working in. And frankly, in my experience, the worst part was the bureaucracy. That was by far as I think back on it a couple of years ago, that's why I'm like, oh, I don't ever want to do that again. But besides that, I mean, you can use the smaller things. You can buy like backpacking solar panels. You can buy some of those solar panels that you fold out and are, I don't know, this big, and they're a couple 100 watts. And you put it into a battery pack that if you run out of, or if your power goes down, you can at least run your refrigerator off of it for a couple of hours. There's a lot of small things that you can do out there as well. It just really depends on what you want to do with your renewable energy, or why you want to do anything with renewable energy. Yep. Okay, moving on. Let's see what the next question is. How does a solar panel convert sunlight to electricity? Oh, what? Hey, I wasn't ready for technical questions here. Oh my goodness, this is something to do with Einstein. The electricity comes down and hits the solar panel, and it shoots an electron out of the, oh wow. Oh my goodness, this was cruel. I should have been warned. I know exactly what it is. Like, I just can't remember the terms. The photon comes down, ejects the electron out of the, not the conduction band, the one below the band gap, and shoots it into the conduction band, which then it goes along. Oh my goodness. Okay, yeah. I'm more familiar with that than I'd like, because people still ask tons of questions on the semiconductors videos. And so even though semiconductors was not my strength in college, that's probably been the thing I've answered the most questions about. So it's actually forced me to learn about it better. Okay, so we're going to the next question. Should I put solar panels on my house? Is it economically wise? Oh, that's interesting, because I think I just mentioned that in the last question. We put solar panels on our house. We're in Idaho, and we're also in a spot that in the winter it gets snowy and you don't see very much sun. So in the winter we produce almost nothing. It's like literally a tenth as much as we make in August and July timeframe. And also, literally just a few months ago, Idaho Power changed it. So instead of getting a credit for credit, now they pay you based on whatever they feel like paying you on. So typically at this point in the summer, it's summer right now, we have not only we don't have any electric bill, but we're also building up credits. However, since that changed, we still have an electric bill. So the economically wise is dependent on those two things. And first, how much electricity are you getting? If you are in New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California, Texas, you actually start to get more cloudy days, but the other ones, and you have tons of sun, Las Vegas, great. Yeah, you're going to be producing basically not 365 days a year, but almost every day. And unlike here, where when it snows, it's not just we lose that day, we lose like 2 days after that while the snow is melting off of the solar panels. You don't get snow in Las Vegas, so you're producing almost all the time. So that's a very big factor for you. Where are you? What is it looking like? And then the economically wise, that also just really depends. In California, power is super expensive, but at the same time, over the years, they've been trying to make less and less benefit to solar generators, residential solar generators. So I don't know if that's still the case where it's economically viable in California. I would assume that is the case. In Idaho, with Idaho Power, it's only been a few months. I haven't looked into it in depth. I have a feeling that the change they made it so solar is just no longer economically viable. Like if you're doing it for money, that's probably not going to work in our situation due to those changes. But it really does depend on where you're from, where you are, and who you're working with. So look into it. If you can, it's cool. I like it. I like having the solar up there. I like the fact that in the summer we have before we had no power bill, but now, well, I don't want to get on a rant. Oh, and one final thing about that economic viability. Before they changed things, it was only economically viable for us to do it because we did it ourselves. Like if you go somewhere else, the calculations we did, we would have never broken even. And so now, if you are going to break even, like I just don't see there being any chance whatsoever of using a third-party provider. And I don't even know if it's economically viable if you do it yourself. That's the calculations. I don't know. So I don't know. You're going to have to look into it yourself. I talked about doing it by myself on a video from a few years ago. If you want to go check that out, that's great. If not, cool. You can stick around while we answer the rest of these questions. Which, speaking of, next question. How do wind turbines convert wind to electricity? Actually, that's pretty straightforward. I mean, it uses the same technology as basically every other normal coal, nuclear, hydro. It's basically just taking a big motor, a generator and a motor. That's two sides of the same coin, I guess. Is that a proper usage of that phrase? Anyway, where you're turning your magnet inside of a wire coil and it's creating a current. So wind turbines, it does the exact same thing. I think the only difference is that due to the fact that you are turning that generator based on the supply of wind, not so much on the demand of electricity, I think that there is more control in terms of changing the blade pitch so that you hit the sweet spot. And I don't know if they can change the gearing. I know that there's definitely a gearbox in there that changes the rotation of the turbines versus the generator itself. But I don't know if that's variable. I'm not that experienced in it. But the basic premise of it is the exact same as in most other forms of electrical generation. So, moving on. What would you choose this year? An electric or internal combustion engine car? That's an interesting question. Internal combustion. At this point, I totally would. It's funny. I have a friend who lives in Europe, and he rented an electric car for 24 hours. And in that 24 hours, I hate when I'm not perfectly accurate, but if I'm not mistaken, my memory is that to drive about 150 miles, they spent almost 10 hours charging in one way or another. Like they found a slow charger and then they just topped up maybe 20 miles and then they went somewhere else and they found a fast charger, but then it stopped and didn't allow them to charge anymore. And each place they had to download an app. It was pretty ridiculous. Now, I live in the middle of nowhere in Idaho and it's cold. And if I were to get stuck between our little pueblito and the next city over, I always keep my truck right now at least half a tank of gas, so that if I go off the side of the road and I can keep the exhaust clear, I can sit there and hopefully keep the engine running and keep myself warm until somebody can come and rescue me. Whereas an electric car, when they're using the electric heat to heat up the car in the winter, it drops the mileage significantly. And that's a huge concern for me. That makes me very nervous. So that's one of the big things, is that for me, it's a safety issue in terms of not wanting to get stuck out in the middle of nowhere and not being able to last a long time with that. But it's also, I don't get the warm and fuzzy for longevity on electric cars. The batteries don't have the lifespan. The 1,000,000-mile battery sounds very interesting to me, and I would love to look into it more once that happens, and where I'm not concerned about a major $10,000, $20,000 battery swap out in a couple of years because the battery dies. So that's another big issue for me of why I still would go with the internal combustion. At the same time, due to the fact that I have solar panels and up until Idaho Power changed it so that I'm not getting as much out of it, I was thinking about an electric car just to go from here to the nearest big city, which is about 40-ish miles away. And it would just be nice because that would reduce costs significantly. That being said, they're still super expensive compared to their ICE counterparts. So I am not anti-electric car, but at this point, I still would go with something internal combustion. And bring on the hate comments. All right, moving on to the next one. Can our electrical grid handle everyone having an EV? Oh no, not even close. Oh, it's so funny. Yeah, our electrical grid is not at all. It's not only the generation, it's the distribution. Again, I live in the middle of nowhere. I was talking to a farmer, has his farm about a mile down the street, and he said when he was talking to Idaho Power, he wanted, I want to say, half horsepower. I don't remember the numbers. He wanted a certain size pump for irrigation. And Idaho Power said, we just can't handle that. And they said, we'll give you this size, and it's half the size. We can handle that. You can put in that pump. And basically, if anybody else wants a pump down this line, too bad. They can't get it. And imagine that with how many millions of households in the US suddenly putting on rather huge loads of charging their cars. It would be phenomenal. It would absolutely take down our grid. And there needs to be massive overhaul of infrastructure on a national level, and then also in a community level and even on like an apartment level. Like, how in the world people that live in an apartment, that live in, let's just say a 6-story high rise in LA, and they have parking either underneath their apartments or on the streets out. Like, how are they going to get 50 to 100 amp circuits to every single parking spot for those vehicles? It's funny because there's so much focus on the vehicle infrastructure that we're trying to change to make sure that the vehicles are reliable, that they're safe, that they have good range, all that sort of stuff. But for me, the biggest challenge that we have in the United States is that grid infrastructure and not even being close, because that, instead of being like, oh, we can make these changes and make this, $70,000 car, $40,000 car, a $40,000 reliable car due to changing things, it's like, oh, we need $1 trillion to update our infrastructure, and we need the time to do it, and we need the political buy-in. And I'm just skeptical. So at this moment, though, absolutely not. Eventually, if people get behind it, maybe. Well, eventually, yes, of course, eventually. But how soon? I don't know. Next question. Taking into account toxic materials and batteries, etc., do you think electric vehicles are a net environmental gain over traditional cars? Okay, that's a good question. I don't know. My personal uninformed opinion, based off of, well, not completely uninformed, but not as informed as other people, is that it's about a net, like a break even. Like, the way I look at it, I would not buy an electric car for environmental reasons. I would buy an electric car for performance reasons, cost reasons, cost to use. We don't have to do oil changes. It's cheaper, especially in Idaho, where despite getting screwed over by Idaho Power with our solar panels, it's still much cheaper here in terms of electricity than other places, and most places in the United States. So I'm not against electric vehicles from a financial point of view, but from an environmental point of view, there's just a lot of bad stuff that goes into them that they don't really have great ways to recycle yet. So I would say no. Feel free to discuss that in the comments. Politely, please. Next question. Solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, or nuclear? Pick one. Ooh. Okay, well, dang. One? All right. I live in Idaho. I've mentioned that a couple times now. We get a lot of our power from hydro. Hydro is a great source of power. I love it. However, you're not going to get hydro in Kansas. You just can't. Geothermal? Wonderful. Iceland, is it? That they do some ridiculous amount of their energy comes from geothermal. Fantastic resource. You're not going to get that in Kansas. Nuclear, you can do anywhere. I personally think, and this is yet another rabbit hole that we can go down to, I personally think that the fear in regards to nuclear is overblown. And I think that that's something that we should be actively looking into, both on the fusion, but also the fission side. And I think that that's a great baseline power resource that can be used anywhere and can be improved upon. And I would say that nuclear is probably the best all around, no matter where, source, because all of the rest of these depend on where you are. And a lot of them are also dependent on the time of day. They're completely unreliable. So I'm just going to get shot. But I would go nuclear. That would be my one pick. Even though I love hydro, I can see that people have drawbacks for that. I think it's totally worth it. And I think geothermal's great. It just won't work. Okay, next question. What future energy tech are you most interested in? Oh, fusion, definitely. I know that fusion is always 50 years away or whatever. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that there's a lot of really interesting fusion companies out there that are doing fascinating things. And 50 years out, I think now we're going to be forever 10 years out. I don't know. I'm hoping I'm totally wrong there. But I feel like fusion is one of those things where you get the benefits of nuclear energy without the drawbacks. That being said, that is under the assumption that we can get fusion to be somewhat economical. And at this point, we just don't know. So it could be, hey, we come up with fusion, but it's super expensive and difficult to do. And we are never able to scale it in a way that's reasonable. And if that's the case, well, then obviously it's not going to work. But I think fusion has a huge amount of positive potential, and it has so few drawbacks other than the complexity and the difficulty. But I think that's just a thing of science and engineering getting it figured out. So without any question, I would say I am most excited about fusion because it checks all of the boxes, assuming that we can, one, do it, and two, that we can do it affordably. But I think that's one of those things that even if necessary, and I don't think it'll eventually be the case, but even if necessary, that it's a little bit more expensive, I think that due to the, at least at the moment, the anticipated environmental benefits, it'll be well worth it. So very, very excited about that. And that is all we have on renewable technology. So hopefully that answered some of the questions that you have in regards to me as an electrical engineer, my perspective on renewable energy. I think that this has unfortunately been a heavily politicized topic, and that's why I'm anticipating a lot of death threats. So thank you for putting me in this situation where I'm going to have that. But the reality is it shouldn't be. There's absolutely no reason that this should be political. This is something where we can look at it from an engineering perspective and just come up with the best solution and acknowledge up front the pros and cons and the benefits and the drawbacks of every technology, and be able to talk about it rationally and reasonably so that we can come to a consensus on where we should be putting our efforts to make all of this work so much better. So I assume you have thoughts, so please leave them in the comments below. As it is, if you want to give this video a like, I'd appreciate it. Subscribe to our channel. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care. Hey, we hope you enjoyed the video. Did you know that circuitbread.com has more than tutorials?
One of the other many things that we have are several excellent open source textbooks that benefit from our search tools, highlighting, super fast page changes, and keyboard-friendly navigation. Go check them out.